None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any page of kratomscience.com is intended, nor should it be considered, medical claims or medical advice.
This is the Kratom Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for kratomscience.com, your source for all things Kratom.
This is Kratom News for November 2022. So I was up all night. We were waiting for the election results. The wife was actually down at the precinct. She was judge of elections down there and working at the polls. And judge of elections just means you're in charge of the place. Of course, there weren't any Kratom referendums on any ballot. I tweeted out the other day, that's kind of an issue that's, way to the periphery of the popular mind. Still, despite our best efforts here on Kratom Science to educate people about it. That's why we ask you to share the podcast, and if you think there's any valuable information whatsoever, just so people can learn about this Kratom issue. 6 states that had ballot initiatives, 5 of them were cannabis. That was Arkansas, Maryland, Missouri, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And Colorado had a psychedelics decriminalization referendum called Prop 122. I'm looking at the live results from Marijuana Moment, probably my favorite website that is really good journalism on any cannabis issue. Kyle Yeager, he's the main author there, and I always just like to give him a shout out because it's really good about the marijuana issue. So I relied on that and Ballotpedia to write my article for Kratom Science. And so, but we'll have a link to everything. So Maryland is the one that's nearest to us, and I have a lot of friends in Maryland, and I'm happy to say that they passed what seems like a good marijuana legalization amendment. It'll be for people who are 21 years and older. It'll take effect on July 1st of next year. We have a punk rock festival, the Savage Mountain Punk Fest, that we go to every year down there, and I have a lot of friends and a lot of bands that I'm friends with come from Pittsburgh, and we all go down and have a big old pool party on the one day, and then there's bands for 3 days. But I don't think, it'll be legal for everybody to have marijuana, but I don't think it will be available yet, because I think July 1st is probably when the growers can start growing it to sell. So we won't be able to go anywhere and buy gummies at the local dispensary yet. So the purchase and possession of up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis would be legal for adults. Would remove criminal penalties for possession of up to 2.5 ounces. So maybe there would be a fine if you had above 1.5 ounces. Adults 21 and older would be allowed to grow up to 2 plants for personal use and gift cannabis without remuneration. They spelled it wrong. Remuneration, I think it's the word. Past convictions for conduct made legal under the proposed law would be automatically expunged, and people currently serving time, this is from Marijuana Moment, by the way, for such offenses would be eligible for resentencing. Legislation makes it so people with convictions for possession with intent to distribute could petition the courts for expungement. So even people who probably have low-level selling crimes could get expunged. So this is a really good, I think, bill all the way. The only opponents were... There was a Republican state senator, Parent Action Network, which I believe just opposes any legalization of anything. They just like the drug war, how it is. This group, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, they opposed many of these ballot initiatives because they are for pro-medical marijuana only. They think that keeping it illegal will making it legal will lead to problem use, which I don't really think will happen. I mean, there might be like a slight uptick and maybe new users who just aren't used to using it and might get into trouble or whatever. But I don't know. For me and most people, I think marijuana has always been self-limiting. Like if you have too much and you lost your car keys 3 days in a row, you're like, okay, I'm a little done smoking pot right now. But anyway, the Maryland bill that passed, that's really good. The other one that passed was Missouri. You get a registration card for personal cultivation. So this is really good. So both states have personal cultivation. They allow it, which is a thing that the cannabis big industry has been lobbying against. So that's a pretty detailed one that passed. This was a mixed, there was a Republican state rep that supported this. Kansas City mayor supported it, and multiple organizations. This group, Show Me Canna Freedom, opposed it. It says this initiative eliminates nearly all competition through constitutionally protected license caps. So a lot of the opponents in a lot of these, which is important to point out, like in Arkansas NORML, which is one of the oldest national organization for the reform of marijuana laws. They're one of the oldest marijuana advocacy groups. I remember signing their petitions in the 90s, but I think they started in the 70s, really. But they opposed it because they believe some of these bills, they have an initiative for 2024. The Arkansas one, it was opposed, so it didn't pass. They are trying to keep it from being a monopoly. I think in Arkansas, they don't have anything for felony expungement, for even possession or anything. So a lot of pro-marijuana groups oppose some of these. And then there was the one in Colorado with the psychedelics. There was a group in particular, which is a Native American group called Native Coalition Against Prop 122. They say it stands to threaten, exploit, commercialize indigenous peoples and spiritual traditions, and positions these natural medicines for extractivism, some of which are not indigenous to Colorado, by those with limited understanding and knowledge of the medicines and their applications. They also say the bill's authors are motivated by profiting from a newly created psychedelics industry. Native Americans in the Southwest have seen their peyote cacti, which are already rare, be poached by people who just wanted to trip on peyote, whereas it's part of their tradition, and the whole ritual starts with going out and finding it. The medicine man goes and finds it. There was a good documentary that me and Dr. John covered on one of the Journal Club episodes about it was a Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, and there was a really good episode about Native Americans and peyote and their rituals, and they have been opposing some of these psychedelics legalizations because they're not adequately protecting their spiritual traditions.
Yeah, that's definitely a major issue that will be faced. As you said, this is a very big deal. Using these things as, aids for spiritual journeys and stuff. It's very important to them, not some, teenager looking for fun, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Honestly, what it will end up boiling down to, even if they do extract, stuff that could be used in psychiatric environments, because it can help. Psychedelics overall can help with stuff like that. Peyote in particular, yeah, because it is so rare at this point, that's definitely one they need to completely stay away from.
Mm-hmm. And there is a common cactus that's legal to grow, the San Pedro cactus. You see it if you're in the Southwest or Southern California, you see it in people's yards, and that has mescaline in it. If people want it, they can get it from that, but this should be all incorporated in the legislation. And as well, they're like trading psychedelic futures on Wall Street, so this is coming because there's big money behind it. The Native Americans definitely should be listened to because they've had thousands of years of use of healing. Using psychedelics for healing. It's only in the past, since the 1960s that people started using it for, it's healing in a way accidentally, but it was mostly kind of a party drug, and that's how I've used it many times, but it's always been accidentally healing. Oh, I'm going to have fun and be silly with my friends, but oh wow, this really like made me change my mind and think about stuff, and made me be even like eat better, and it does really change it. But I think even the psychologists and stuff that are starting this practice should really, really study the Native traditions and really try to communicate with Native Americans. And you could not only craft better policy, you could craft a better psychology of how to actually heal people by taking these traditions, and you don't have to copy the traditions. You do it in a way that's, but you should learn from them, definitely. And I mean, that's what we should have been doing from the beginning when we landed here. Learn from the people who live here and have used these plants that grow here. Totally understand why they would oppose that. However, I think it is... I don't know if it passed yet. They might be still counting the votes, but I think it looks like it is going to pass. Yeah. But I think a lot of these initiatives, they have not yet crafted the law. So it's just like the people say yes or no, and then from there you go and craft the law. So there's 74% in with Colorado. We're recording this Wednesday, and it's going up tomorrow. So this information might change, but I'll put the link. And I'm looking at Marijuana Moment Live marijuana election results, and it's 51 to about 49%, with 74% of the votes counted in Colorado for the psychedelics measure. So we'll see where that goes, and hopefully they can craft the law with all these interests in mind, and not just to make people money, which is, a big issue with how all of our legal system works. Unfortunately,
in general, it seems like Colorado specifically is doing better with that type of stuff.
Yeah,
just overall. So I'm hopeful that they will at least try. Someone, it will at least push them to be respectful to the Native American culture and stuff like that.
Yeah. North Dakota, South Dakota, there wasn't really much there. They were opposed. They failed. The public also opposed them there, so I don't think they're quite ready for legalization in those states. And those are like small states. There's not a lot of population in there, and they should just do what their people want, and then they'll probably be ushered into a federal, depending on how the Senate and Congress ends up, they'll be ushered in to a federal legalization. That's the thing. So there are Republicans that support a lot of these, but just as a statement of fact, libertarians almost always support legalization, and mostly Democrats are supporting some of these. But I mean, with the Kratom laws, it's across the board, really. Mainly because the AKA are guys from the Republican Party, so they can, and mainly Democrats have a proclivity to have reform drug laws. So in the Kratom world, it's probably about 50-50 which politicians. I actually had a Republican guy from Oklahoma as a guest, and I'm going to be having a county councilwoman from Allegheny County here, who's a Democrat. And so the next one's the big lawsuit in Georgia. This was covered by the Associated Press and carried in major newspapers like the Miami Herald. And I did an article about it called "Lawsuit Slams Kratom Industry. Antihistamine combined with Kratom extract may have caused death."
The parents of a man who died after ingesting kratom extract are suing multiple kratom companies and the American Kratom Association. In a 45-page complaint, Dana and John Pope allege their 23-year-old son, Ethan, died after purchasing and ingesting, quote, one or more bottles of OPMS extract from 2 stores in 2 Georgia towns. The complaint alleges Ethan Pope was killed by kratom alone, though he had prescription drugs in his system. Quote, Ethan's body was clean of all illegal drugs and alcohol and only contained hydroxyzine, an antihistamine, citalopram, I think that's how you pronounce that, an antidepressant, and of course, the mitragynine, or kratom, that killed him. They based this information on a report from the Floyd County coroner that listed mitragynine intoxication as cause of death, as well as an investigation by law enforcement officials, the Georgia State Bureau of Investigations. In Georgia, a coroner is an elected official who is required to take an annual training course with the Georgia Coroners Training Council.
Yeah, so he purchased bottles of OPMS extract. OPMS is a very heavy extract, and I don't like talking about kratom companies too much, but this is all from this lawsuit, so that's who's being sued. They're also suing like the distributor or the importer, whoever imported this. They're suing the two companies that own the two places where he bought the extracts. They're suing the American Kratom Association, and we'll get to that later. He went to one store. There wasn't enough of these extracts for him, so presumably he bought all the ones in the one store, went to the Chevron gas station. These are two different Georgia towns, and he bought more at that Chevron. The quote was, "It was clean of all legal drugs," but it says only hydroxyzine, citalopram, I think. Yeah, I think you're right. And then it says the kratom that killed him. And the whole reason I pointed out of the coroner elections, I mean, and this was pointed out in Dr. Carl Hart's book called Drug Use for Grown-Ups. That's where I got the information. He has a appendix in the back that talks about how coroners are elected. Sometimes there's a medical examiner that has a degree in toxicology, which should be true for every one of these positions. This particular coroner in Floyd County, Georgia, has been a fire battalion chief for like, I think 30 or 40 years. So he has a lot of experience probably with deceased people. And I'm not saying he doesn't have experience. You only have to take one course per year. That's a lot different than having a toxicology degree or even like an associate's degree. Nothing against the guy personally, but it's a problem with everywhere. So mitragynine intoxication, we don't know how that happens. So we know like with fentanyl and heroin and stuff like that, the way you die is that you get respiratory depression. You stop breathing, and you basically suffocate. It just seems horrible. That's how people die from heroin overdoses and fentanyl overdoses. Of all like the mouse studies and stuff we looked at, they have given a mouse like probably the equivalent of a gallon of that extract stuff. There was one in 1972. The mouse not only not died, they said he showed no ill effects whatsoever. So we don't know if mitragynine can kill you. And too much of anything can kill you. That's the one thing that everybody has to realize. There's such thing as water intoxication, where your brain essentially drowns if you chug a bunch of gallons of water in a short period of time. And water is like 70% of our bodies, and that could still kill you. There's like a toxicology maxim: the dose makes the poison. It's like a paraphrase from Paracelsus, I think is the guy. He's like an ancient alchemist, Greek guy. If you took a toxicology 101 course, that would probably be your first class. You would learn that quote, because everything can be poisonous. So to say that kratom can't kill anybody is incorrect, but so can green tomatoes if you ate too many of them. It's called tomatine. That can cause a toxic reaction, but you'd have to buy like a whole 2 boxes of them from the store and eat all of them, and nobody's gonna do that.
Yeah, eat all of them in a short period of time.
Yeah, and in this case especially, he had antihistamines. I guess if we just read the next part, because this is why I think it was a drug. It was a kratom and drug interaction with the antihistamines.
Along with many other common prescription drugs, hydroxyzine binds to CYP3A4 enzymes in the metabolic process. If ingested with other substances that bind with the same enzymes, the metabolism of hydroxyzine slows, which increases its concentration in the blood and can therefore cause a toxic adverse event. Grapefruit juice is an example of a substance that can cause adverse events if taken with hydroxyzine and other drugs. Alkaloids in kratom have been shown to bind CYP3A4 enzymes. A CDC study published in October 22, as pointed out in a recent episode of the Everything Kratom podcast, highlighted the major role antihistamines played in opioid overdose deaths in 2019 and 2020. According to the study, quote, among 92,033 overdose deaths during 2019 to 2020, 13,574, which is 14.7%, were antihistamine positive, and 3,345, which is 3.6%, or antihistamine involved, including hydroxyzine. And antihistamines were also listed in the CDC study as the sole cause of death in 90 of the overdose cases.
Yeah, so I'll link to that episode of the Everything Kratom podcast, and Jamie, who I've had on here, he does a really good podcast. His format is he'll just have a thought about something, make a 10, 15-minute podcast, and put a couple out a week, which is a good format that's different from ours. He pointed out, these antihistamines, 90 deaths just antihistamines caused. And I've heard from people who used to be addicted to opioids that if you were running out of your supply and you take some Benadryl, it'll make it last longer. That's what this CYP3A4 enzyme thing is. There are a lot of prescription medicines that occupy this enzyme, and that's why I want to just tell people to be very, very careful when you're taking any kind of prescription. I take something for my cholesterol that I can't take grapefruit juice with, and I looked it up, and it's like 1 glass of grapefruit juice. It's either a whole grapefruit or a glass of will block. It's kind of like traffic. It's kind of like going into a traffic tunnel. If you have like too many cars in there from the grapefruit juice and the in my case it would be grapefruit juice and the statin I take to lower my cholesterol, the concentration in the blood will make it so I took 20 pills instead of 1 pill with just grapefruit juice, because that's how it metabolizes. So that is basically how kratom and antihistamines and grapefruit juice all work. They all occupy some of the CYP3A4 enzymes, and there's many different subcategories. I think there's like CYP2D6 or something. I that's not the exact one, so don't rely on me for that. But just if you're on prescription drugs, any prescription drugs, go look it up and see if they occupy the CYP3A4 enzymes. Even if they don't, like metformin, I take metformin because I'm like mildly diabetic, keeps my sugar in check. If I take that too close to kratom, I get a little sick because it takes sugar out of my body, and I think kratom is actually I've been reading a couple studies where that actually lowers sugar on its own too. So it's kind of like putting my body way too. There's been a couple times where I've had kratom like right after my metformin pill. As long as I space it out within a couple hours, it's fine. But I've gotten nauseated and sick. It doesn't put me in danger of dying, but it's just like one of those things. So you got to be really responsible. And I notice a lot of these guys that are dying when they take tons of kratom and they almost always have something else in their system. They're young guys who, when I was their age, somebody would hand me a pill at a party and I would take it and say, what was that? But I was an idiot, basically. And some of these guys are just irresponsible, and they have to. I just feel like it's our responsibility to tell people as much as we can that there are risks and you should be safe. But if you keep your dose low and do as much research as you can, this is used safely by millions of people, so it's not deadly poison on its own. I really firmly believe that. I think all the deaths that had just kratom, there's either another explanation, or there was one death where the guy ate a bunch of powder, he got sedated, he fell asleep, passed out, and then he choked on the powder because he had so much in his system. And we should say that it's not the same as grapefruit juice, kratom, because it can cause physical dependency or dependency like coffee, where you have to have some every day to feel normal. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be just like a coffee habit. It could also be, if you're prone to addiction, it can lead to that. And it looks like this guy, Ethan, was addicted to kratom because they did find a note that said, stop taking kratom as on his to-do list. So it is a special thing with kratom where people want to take more and more of it, whereas with grapefruit juice, nobody wants to drink more than 1 glass of that. But
I feel like the fact that he was on an antidepressant too, that shows he wasn't exactly mentally stable. So the fact that he had something like, he's probably taking it way more than he really needed to. Mixing it with these other things that he just shouldn't be mixing it with to begin with.
Jamie on Everything Kratom podcast host Jamie also pointed out that he was looking at some kratom toxicology reports where they kept going over and over with these blood samples of people who died and it was ruled mitragynine only, and they had to sometimes a couple times test the blood before they almost always found something else. And in a couple of the cases, he showed that they found that antidepressant drug. And there was a lot of comments on his podcast that said, oh, yeah, that stuff is heavy. I was on that stuff before. That's really heavy. I couldn't take it with anything else, or it would cause a reaction.
This kind that he's on? Or
yeah,
he was
this
on,
citalopram. Yeah. I don't know. I only knew about, the antihistamine, and I really didn't. I kind of heard that before with opioids, and I didn't really think about it with kratom before this case.
Despite the probability that Ethan Pope died as a result of a toxic interaction of kratom and prescription drugs, and not mitragynine alone, as the complaint alleges, the complaint also suggests that companies failed to adequately inform customers of the potential of such interactions. Quote, part of that kratom industry playbook is to blame customers for their own deaths, claiming that they actually died from kratom interacting with another substance in the decedent's body. Interactions they failed to adequately warn about, reads the complaint. Though OPMS has a disclaimer on its website stating, do not use this product in combination with any medications, the complaint alleges that the defendants violated Georgia's existing KCPA by failing to comply with labeling standards laid out in the law.
Now, here's where I partially agree with the lawsuit. So Georgia has a Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and it even says on here, you're supposed to put the name and mailing address of the manufacturer, clear and adequate directions for the consumption and safe and effective use, and you should have precautionary statements. They have all that on their website, this company, but it was not, they allege it was not on the product. They could have easily complied with that law with a couple of $100 of investment to put that on their products. And this is kind of what frustrates me. I don't know why the kratom industry isn't protecting itself by just doing this in every state, no matter if there's a law or not. I think most of the websites, most of the major ones, has it on their website, this disclaimer, but it should be on the products, and there should be dosage recommendations and all these warnings, and just say, and on the disclaimers, they all say just don't use it with prescription drugs, which just about covers it, even though you probably can with some, can't with others. It's just this kind of failure of the industry to just regulate itself. And I mean, this law wasn't enforced because I don't think there's any money for enforcement there. So in Oregon, they actually allocated $2 million a year or something specifically for kratom enforcement. Kratom sold there has to be imported into the state and packaged by a processor, and then it goes to the retailers. They have to inspect the processor. They're subject to regular inspections. I don't know, once, twice a year or something like that. They have to have a good manufacturing practices facility. When they pass these laws in states like Oklahoma, Georgia, where they don't like spending tax dollars on a lot of things, and it's more likely to pass if no tax dollars are going to be spent. Well, it's just like a toothless law. The state doesn't enforce it, and the company is so cheap that they won't spend a couple $100 to put a label on the package. Yeah. Okay, and then there's this other part about it where they're actually suing. This lawsuit, they sue everybody. So this other part about it where they're suing the AKA, and this is a quote from the lawsuit of knowingly and recklessly running a sham standards program to cloak kratom manufacturers in a false appearance of legitimacy. And this is in reference to the AKA's Good Manufacturing Practices Program, and OPMS is at the top of that list. If you listen to our podcast episodes with Stacy Lloyd and Jennifer Bruce that I did, I think they were back in the springtime, they will tell you that, it's a program where the companies have to hire their own auditor, and then the auditor gives them a GMP approval, and then they give the AKA money to be in the program.
There's a lot of steps too. I feel like that's something important to mention. But there's a lot of steps that you have to go through in order to get certified.
Well, the issue is that Jennifer Bruce and Stacy Lloyd brought up was they don't have like an in-house GMP compliance person. So these companies, they'll go through this once and maybe once a year, which is good, but they're not like kind of thoroughly checked, I don't think, as well. But the Kratom Vendors Association is a organization that is run by good manufacturing practices compliance experts. Stacy Lloyd is the one, and they actually you become a member and they actually help you become compliant. But there's there's a big investment for every company. It's gonna cost, like, some of the companies would have to build a separate facility, or the Kratom Vendors Association actually helps the company, help them go through the steps, and they help them become GMP compliant. If you listen to those episodes, they will articulate better than I can why there needs to be a little bit stronger of a GMP program, which I think the Kratom Vendors Association offers. I think most companies in the AK's GMP are pretty solid. You know, I mean, this company at the top of the list would not even... This lawsuit alleges that they didn't have these proper labels on the product, and now they're gonna have to probably spend millions in a settlement. This is one of the bigger companies. They might be able to afford to take the hit, but I don't understand why they would even take that risk if the lawsuit is true. It might not be.
The only thing I really feel like it needs to be said is the fact that, like, it just seems like they're believing anything they might be told, you know? Is if they did any research on this at all, they would know that it could not have been just the kratom that caused his death.
Yeah, and I wish they would realize this, because we have to warn people based on real information of the real risks, not that kratom's going to kill you, because people are going to take a little bit of kratom and say, well, that barely affected me. It's not going to kill me. I can take as much as I want. Well, that's not true if you're taking other things. So we have to get the real information out of there rather than this drug scare crap. Like, that's, you know, this
scraping the surface.
Yeah, the whole reefer madness, I think, led to a lot of people assuming that cocaine, heroin was just like weed because they were lying about the weed. So I really don't like although this family, you know, I can't blame them at all. Like, I can't blame them at all. They're not going to become substance experts on the alkaloids right away. They're not going to care. It doesn't feel good to be right against somebody who lost a loved one, and even if they're wrong. But you know what? I want to go to this story of this other guy. It was Transylvania, North Carolina. I think it's Transylvania County. That's definitely out in the mountains. This guy, his son vaped kratom, which I have not seen or maybe not even heard tell of a kratom vape, but I assume they exist. He was on suboxone, this kid, and this is from the Transylvania Times. I think it's Transylvania County, North Carolina. It's not where Dracula's from. Father recalls tragedy, highlights vaping dangers. This is from November 5th. His son was addicted, and he vaped kratom, and he had suboxone in his system, which also is kind of strange to me because I haven't really studied this case very closely, but suboxone contains buprenorphine, is a classical opioid, which if you have enough of it, but it's also a partial opioid agonist like kratom, where it's really, really hard to get respiratory depression from it. And that's why they use it in treatment now. But a lot of people say suboxone is pretty bad. So he could have taken a lot of the suboxone and along with the kratom, and that may have caused it. But the main thing is and you pointed out in the notes, is how this guy, his father seems to have a better understanding of addiction in general, and it seems like his son had a long-term opioid addiction, and he died. His name is Todd, and he died December 11th, 2019. He was only 34. Just the quotes from this guy, it's really kind of heart-wrenching because he really understands what addiction is. He said when he saw his son dead, it was the first time he looked like he was at peace. That's like so sad and tragic. And as we always say, the opposite of addiction is connection. He really understands the psychology of addiction, which is caused by trauma.
But he definitely said he's just trying to help people, maybe to prevent it from happening to others. He didn't mean any ill will. He's not attacking the companies or anything. He's not attacking anyone, really. The other family is very hostile. This father, I didn't get any hostility from that at all.
I can't be like, oh, that was bad to do, because they're angry because of this thing that they don't know about, a contributor to their son's death. But I just know that outlawing kratom is going to hurt millions of people. It's really going to hurt millions of people that are going to turn to, for one thing, the people already using it will turn to, street drugs, or they'll buy it on the street. It'll be laced with fentanyl. They'll be like, well, I can take 10 pills of kratom and that's my dose. Well, what if there's fentanyl in it? Well, it's going to kill them. Criminalizing people doesn't help anybody's drug problems. It never has. It's never been about protecting people. I just hope these families realize that they're just going to hurt more people. But guys like this, okay, so let's say this guy's name, Todd Clary is the guy that died, and his father, Mike. The way he responds to it, he's like, yeah, this stuff mixed with suboxone, I think it's dangerous. You don't know what's in the vapes. Vaping kratom, I have no idea what it does. There's nothing in the science about that. So I wouldn't recommend vaping or smoking kratom at all. I drink it as a tea. I wouldn't even recommend the extracts unless you're really, really experienced. It would be like never having a drink before and then going out and doing 20 shots of whiskey.
I was going to say just downing an entire bottle or something.
Guy Mike, he seemed to be really understanding of how addiction worked. It looked like when he found out his son was addicted, he really studied about it. He's saying every quote is scientifically accurate as well as heartfelt. And it just breaks my heart with these folks that go through this stuff. It's terrible, but I'm glad the guy's doing what I think he can do, and that's what we want to do. Is we want to warn people against these risks. So watch out with the antihistamines and the prescription drugs in general. Just not even the scientists know exactly which prescription drugs it interacts with and everything. I try to read all the science that comes out on kratom. And try to report it in a simple way. There is traditional use. Nobody's ever died from it traditionally that we know of, but there weren't heavy, high-dose prescription drugs traditionally in Thailand and Vietnam and all the places where they traditionally use kratom. We just have to be careful. It's just new. It's a new thing, and I've been focused on that this year, is just trying to, and I might piss advocates off in the kratom world, but I don't know. I just want to keep people safe, and hopefully we can do that.
Yeah, it's very good to remain, as a good word for this would be, impartial. Do not show one or the other side. Just as wide as possible, just so they get or the listeners get as pure of information as possible to be able to make the best decisions for themselves.
Yeah, and I hope some people out there appreciate that, and we totally are in favor of legal kratom. Outlawing kratom would, even if it was as dangerous as some of these folks think it is, which it isn't, outlawing it is, the fact that it has risks, in my mind, with what I know about how drug laws and drug prohibition affects people, something that has risks, it's an argument for keeping it legal, keeping it out there and keeping it pure. If people could have opium poppy tea instead of fentanyl, if that was legal, then they might just have their opium poppy tea, and it's not as dangerous as fentanyl, even though enough of it could kill you. It's going to harm people to outlaw kratom. It really is.
Yeah, we have seen, I'm trying to think of what countries exactly, but some European countries have legalized all drugs, just
Portugal.
in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, Portugal is one of them. And the rates dropped drastically after that. All because, things are better. Because, just in general.
Yeah, it's out in the open, and they're People can raise their hand and say, hey, I got a drug problem, before you see them passed out on the street in front of a methadone clinic, before they get to that point. So in Oregon, they just decriminalize all drugs. So that's still developing, and we're still seeing what goes on with that. That's why, like, going back to the first thing we talked about, I think we're getting in the right direction, but I think there should be debate on how these things are decriminalized. I talked to Morgan Godwin on here, and she's like a really good journalist that's up on the drugs issue in Oregon. And she said, I want legal heroin, but I don't want some of these companies like advertising on billboards like Budweiser. I'm like, even alcohol, I don't see an advertisement say, I want to drink. Like we don't need to have advertisements for anything, even alcohol, cigarettes, anything. And
prescription drugs.
Yeah.
That those get me. Those just are completely unnecessary.
Yeah. Your doctor should advertise. I mean, well, they do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and advertise. I don't even like using that word for medication in general. Like it suggests it as a product for purchase, not something that's supposed to help you through whatever you're experiencing.
And so, related to that, just real quick, this other study, ATAI Life Sciences. They announced they are working on a mitragynine-based drug. They put a deuterium molecule in it, which makes it patentable. You used to be able to patent alkaloids. A couple of kratom alkaloids were patented like in the 60s, but you can't do that anymore because it's the natural form of the plant. It's against the law. In two cases, there's another company that added this molecule that I think we talked about last time to 7-hydroxy. But this company, it's called Cures Inc., and they are a subsidiary of Atai Life Sciences. But they added this deuterium molecule to mitragynine. It hasn't been published yet. So these are press releases from the company. So they're definitely, they would be sort of biased to advertise the positive. However, it seems really positive. Eventually, they're going to publish, I think, all the science. I don't really know exactly how the patent works. I think if they're granted the patent, then they can hold it. Then they can publish all the science. So it's kind of like what we were just talking about. It's kind of like on a marketplace. So it's going to be called Cure 101, KUR 101, oral formulation, and they call it deuterated mitragynine, and they add a deuterium molecule. So what their new clinical trial showed is that they're doing human clinical trials, and it showed very low what they call abuse potential. So it's kind of like you're getting pain relief. However, it's not showing addiction like, say, like oxycodone or Vicodin or something would, which really is a measure of physical dependence, because abuse kind of suggests addiction, and for me, addiction is a psychological disorder as a result of it's a response to trauma. There's a debate about everything that causes addiction, but I don't think it's caused by drugs necessarily. But it's looking like mitragynine, you'd be less likely to get dependent or addicted on this particular drug. And I should say, a lot of people worry that they're going to outlaw kratom because this company might develop a drug out of kratom and profit from it, which it's a legitimate concern, but 25% of new drugs are developed from plants. There's a drug from foxgloves. We're still allowed to grow foxgloves in our yard. So I think as long as people advocate for kratom staying available, then it doesn't automatically mean that since there's a drug, it's going to be outlawed. Just pay attention to all this politics that might make it go one way or the other. But yeah, and you mentioned about like if it affects like the lawsuit. Yeah, I think they could look at any and all the science, and because there's a lot of studies showing mitragynine shows low abuse potential with pain relief. That's why it's such an amazing thing. They've been looking for decades for a pain relief drug that doesn't cause severe dependency. The Louisiana thing, yeah, we cover that next time, but there's a Louisiana parish that outlawed kratom, so the other parish kept it so people wouldn't be able to be arrested. They just banned the sale. This parish, Rapides, criminalized it, and I have an article about it. that I'll link if you guys want to read about that. It was just, that a local county council just decided to ban stuff. And the main interesting thing is the police, just like they did in Mississippi, are lobbying so these laws can get passed and they can arrest people. I don't know how that should be illegal. There are laws in different states about state employees campaigning. Like, I couldn't go out. I worked for the state of North Carolina. I couldn't go out on the UNC campus and hand out pamphlets while I was on the clock. So I just don't understand how these police can go around and convince these parishes and counties that, hey, we want to arrest these people for kratom. I think it's just like an injustice.
Seems that's what a lot of people do when learn about something new instead of trying to learn and see actually the potential. They just look, no, this is bad, and then stick to that.
Makes their job easier, I guess, if you frame it in terms of good or bad instead of complex. I really wish these people would think about it and care for the people that voted them into office, because, I don't know, just put a little more time into laws before you pass it. I mean, that goes for every elected official everywhere. All right, thanks, Kailee. That was Kratom News. We do that once a month. This is going up on November 11th, so happy Veterans Day. The music is Risey. The song is called Memories of Thailand. The Kratom Science Podcast is written and produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.